And we found, much to our surprise, the radar altitude was precisely the same as the pressure altitude. Radar altitude, there is a sensor in the bottom of the aircraft and a radio transmitter. And it transmits radio waves from the bottom of the aircraft which bounce off the ground and are then received by the aircraft. So by simply timing the length of time it takes to bounce back, you know precisely how high you are above the ground. And it's exceptionally accurate. And this agreed precisely with the pressure altitude figures. So if we go back to the animation, we've confirmed the altitude. The plane was not only approaching at completely the wrong angle, it was at an altitude where it could not possibly have hit even one of those light poles. Because remember, we're not talking about a high-performance fighter jet here. It's a 100-ton aircraft travelling at over 500 miles an hour. Now, I speak to any pilot who pilots a large commercial airliner. The manoeuvres you have to make in an aircraft when you're travelling 500 miles an hour, the slightest touch of the control column just to manoeuvre. If you try any extreme manoeuvres at that speed, you'll be flying a very loose bag of rivets and pieces very briefly. Now, the flight path changes in the raw file. In the raw file, the flight path shows the plane travelling at the correct angle to knock over the light poles and pass through the hole in the building, which is utterly bizarre because the animation is derived exactly from the raw file. So that's quite a stunning change, and we still have no idea to this day why or how this is. We also have a beacon reading in it from Reagan National Airport, which is just behind the Pentagon. And that's a navigational beacon for pilots coming to land at the airport. And it tells you how far you are from the airport, which is very useful if you're in fog. Using this, we also confirmed the position of the plane with regards to the front of the Pentagon. Because remember, if this plane is 173 feet above the ground, if it's 3 miles away from the Pentagon, you do have time to dip down and level off to knock over these light posts, which are about half a kilometre in front of the Pentagon. But this beacon signal confirmed the position of the plane as being very close to the Pentagon. Absolutely physically impossible for the plane to have hit the light poles. And this is the last segment from the raw output of the flight data recorder file. And if you look at the cell there, which I've highlighted in red, that column, as you can see there, is RADALT, radio altitude. Now in this, the last recorded altitude figure, as you can see, is 273 feet. So according to this, the raw data file, after takeoff, Flight 77 never went below 273 feet up. The Pentagon's 71 feet tall. The light poles are approximately 40. So to say that's interesting is an understatement. Now, we've also got pitch angle, which is whether the nose of the aircraft is going down or whether the nose of the aircraft is going up. And these are the last segments. We have -5, approximately 5 degrees. So the aircraft is nowhere near levelling off, it's pointing downwards. The other possibility being, of course, it has been said that the altitude figures might be out, and if you lowered them all, then perhaps the plane might still be able to have levelled off. And, well, if you move everything down, the plane's still pointing nose down like that. It was never in a position to be levelling off, even if somehow you transposed all the altitude figures downwards. Now, the plot thickens at this point. My research colleagues in the States got themselves some video camera equipment and headed down to the Pentagon, where they interviewed 3 people. 2 of them here, Sergeant Lagasse and Sergeant Brooks. They are both Pentagon police officers, current and at the time. And they were filmed on camera, in uniform, for approximately an hour outside the Pentagon, because they'd seen the plane impact the building with their own eyes on that day. They were both given 2 photographs of the scene, which you can see in the corners here. They were given a pen, and each independently said, draw on the photograph where the plane flew. They signed the photographs afterwards. Their signatures are in the top right and left there. You can just about see the black lines they drew on it. That's very interesting. Those light poles are here and here. And they were standing at the corner of the petrol station here and saw the plane fly right in front of them. And this is Sergeant Lagasse actually showing which tree it flew over. He was that certain of precisely where the plane had flown. This is Sergeant Brooks pointing precisely where he saw the aircraft fly, right in front of his eyes. Here they are drawing on the photographs. This is all on film. It's in a film called The Pentagon. You can see it online. You can see these two being interviewed on film in their uniform for about an hour. You can make up your own minds as to whether you think they're lying. And the third person interviewed was a man called Robert, and he worked at the petrol station, which is here. And he was standing here, and he's again drawn this black line as to where the plane flown. The light poles, the first one is here. Now, with some computer graphics, I've tried to show you the extent of the problem here. The yellow circle there with the arrow is where these two Pentagon police officers were standing, about to refuel their car. The arrow shows you which direction they were facing. The red line is where they say the plane flew. The blue line is where the plane must have flown if it had knocked the poles over and passed through the hole in the front of the building. Now, if the plane had flown on the blue path, they wouldn't even have seen it, possibly unless out the corner of their eye at the very last moment. But certainly, at that point, the plane would have been directly behind them. They wouldn't have seen it. So this is a very interesting conundrum. So, again, are these men lying? I'll leave that up to you to decide. But the simple fact is, they're Pentagon policemen. They are employees of the US Department of Defense. They've been filmed in uniform. And they both said precisely the same thing. So if they are lying, they've almost certainly been instructed by one of their superiors to lie. Now, the reason I say this is that if you're an employee of the Pentagon and a camera team turns up and says, "Oh, we want to talk about Flight 77, tell us what you think," are you going to be filmed in uniform and make up a lie which is going to implicate probably your employers in some sort of lie or cover-up? I think that's unlikely. The fact they both said precisely the same thing also indicates if they are lying, it's premeditated. They have agreed with each other precisely what to say because their stories match absolutely. Or, of course, they could be telling the truth, in which case we have 5 light poles that just spontaneously popped out of the ground. That's a very interesting scenario. Now, here's the radio beacon at Reagan National Airport, and these 3 lines here, the yellow one is 1.5 nautical miles, which is the reading, and the 2 white lines represent the error bands. The data frame layout which we were sent gives every single recorded parameter in the that black box data recorder, and it also tells you the absolute accuracy with which each parameter is recorded, which is 0.1 nautical miles in this case. So the plane must have been in between those 2 white circles. And if you look there, that is the beacon there. This is from Google Earth. You can see the beacon circled. The arrow is pointing towards the Pentagon. And those are the same 3 lines. We're much closer in now. So we can see, according to the radio beacon, the plane at the last moment was somewhere between the 2 white lines at the last moment, which matches up quite well with where you see the plane in the animation I was sent at first. Because if you're flying on the north flight path, the last position could be about here, which is quite close to where it is in the animation. Again, you can see the petrol station there, it's circled with the green, and the arrow is showing you which direction these men were facing. Again, the blue flight path is behind them. How did these men see the plane? And this is another image just showing you the problem we're having here. If you've got a 100-ton airliner, you can't just suddenly zip down a couple of 100 feet. At this point, it's travelling approximately 530 miles an hour, which is about 230 metres per second. The light poles are about 500 metres from the Pentagon, and at the point the plane is, it's got something like, depending on where it is, between about